I am 86 years old, and the quietest lesson of my life arrived too late to save my wife from worry, too late to keep my son from acting like my future was his to arrange, and too late to stop my daughter from mistaking concern for permission. If I had understood earlier that peace needs privacy the way a wound needs clean air, I might have spent fewer years explaining myself and more years living.
Harold Mercer had once been the kind of man who answered every question simply because it had been asked. He had grown up in a paper mill town outside Savannah, where men carried lunch pails, bad knees, and the belief that being open was the same as being decent. When neighbors asked what a shift paid, they were told. When relatives asked what the doctor said, they were told. When family asked what was in the bank, they were told that too. For most of his life, that habit had not seemed dangerous. Then his wife died. Her name was Lillian. She had a soft voice and a stubborn way of folding towels that made them look store-bought. She had spent 49 years beside Harold and could tell from the sound of his shoes on the porch whether he was in a good mood or a black one. After she was gone, the house did something cruel. It stayed standing exactly as it was. The blue teacup near the sink, the yellow curtains she never replaced, her gardening gloves on the back steps, stiff with old dirt. Nothing moved, which made the loss feel less like an ending and more like a room he had stepped out of by mistake. 3 weeks after the funeral, his son, Mark, drove down from Charlotte with a leather folder tucked under his arm. Mark was not a bad man. That was the trouble with most damage in families. It rarely arrived wearing villainy. Usually, it came dressed as efficiency. He sat across from Harold at the kitchen table and spoke in the tone of someone trying not to frighten a child. "We need to get ahead of things, Dad," Harold asked. "Ahead of what?" "The house, your accounts, legal papers, medical stuff. If something happens, we should know where everything is." That word should hung in the room longer than it needed to. Harold, still raw from grief and too tired to defend his own edges, answered everything. He named the bank. He explained the policy Lillian had left behind. He mentioned the small cash envelope taped inside the flour tin. He even said, without being asked twice, that he had been thinking of updating the will before Christmas. By that evening, Mark knew more than he needed. By the following afternoon, Harold's daughter, Denise, had called from Tampa, with hurt already in her voice. "Why does Mark know all this, and I don't?" Harold tried to explain that no one had been chosen over anyone else, but explanation is a poor hammer when pride is the nail. Denise heard favoritism. Mark heard accusation. Harold heard his own kitchen turn into a hallway where everyone talked through him instead of to him. Nothing had even happened yet, and already his life had become a family project. That was the first crack. The second came with the doctor. In the spring of 2021, Harold had a spell in the grocery store parking lot. Not a collapse, nothing dramatic. Just one of those moments when the legs go weak and the body reminds a man that it has been keeping count. The tests showed a heart rhythm issue. "Manageable," the cardiologist said. "Watch it. Change a few habits. Come back in 6 weeks." Reasonable news. But Harold told Mark, and Mark told Denise, and by the time the sun had gone down, both of his children were speaking as if a moving truck should already be in the driveway. Denise wanted him in a condo near her church friends and doctors. Mark wanted him in the downstairs room at his own house for now. His grandson, Evan, who had never once asked about Harold's blood pressure before, suddenly started calling every other evening. "You taking your pills, Grandpa? Need me to set up one of those medication apps? Thought about selling the place before it gets hard." That was when Harold understood that fear did not stay contained once it left a man's mouth. It spread. It picked up opinions. It came back louder. The doctor had not sentenced him to helplessness. His own honesty had. After that, he grew quieter, not colder, quieter. He still answered the important questions. He did not lie about appointments. He did not invent health where there was none. But he stopped giving early access to unfinished thoughts. He stopped reporting every ache like it was public news. He let some things remain between himself, his doctor, and the morning light on the kitchen floor. It helped. The third and worst lesson came over the house. Harold had built the screened porch with Lillian in 1983. He had mismeasured the frame twice, and she had laughed so hard she dropped the box of nails. On damp evenings, they had sat out there with iced tea and listened to cicadas scream themselves hoarse in the oak trees. To everyone else, it was a modest house with aging pipes and uneven floors. To Harold, it was where his life had happened. One Sunday after lunch, Mark stood by the sink and said, too casually, "If you ever decide to sell, don't wait too long. You could still get a decent number in this neighborhood." Harold said nothing. A week later, Denise sent 3 listings for senior communities. A month after that, Evan mentioned how smart it would be to simplify things before there was a crisis. There it was again, that wordless assumption that his life was now a problem waiting to be managed. Harold did not argue. He did something that would have been impossible for the younger version of himself. He kept his thoughts to himself. He called a lawyer in Macon and drove there alone. He reviewed the deed, the will, the beneficiary papers, the emergency instructions, and the trust Lillian had once asked him to finish. He made the decisions in quiet rooms with no family voices climbing over one another. Then he signed what needed signing. Only after everything was settled did he call Mark and Denise to the house. They sat at the same kitchen table, where Lillian had once rolled pie dough, and where grief had first turned into administration. Harold slid the folder across the wood and said, "This is done." Mark frowned. Denise stiffened. "What's done?" she asked. "The house paperwork, the will, medical directives, everything." Marco looked wounded. "You didn't think we should be part of this?" Harold looked at him for a long moment before answering. "No, I thought you should know once it was finished." The silence after that had heat in it. Denise said, "We were trying to help." "I know," Harold said. That answer unsettled them more than anger would have, because anger invites defense. Calm invites reflection. He told them the house would remain his as long as he lived, that no one would be moving him by momentum, and that the rest of the arrangements were private, except where they legally needed not to be. He did not apologize for that. He did not explain it twice. He did not soften it into something negotiable. For a week, both of them were distant. Then life, as it usually does, continued. And nothing terrible happened. No one stopped loving him. No one disappeared. No one was permanently broken by not being handed the map to his private thoughts before he was ready. In fact, something better happened. The calls changed. Mark started asking, "How are you today?" instead of "What's the plan?" Denise stopped sending listings and started sending photos of her roses. Evan came by one Saturday to replace the porch screen and, for the first time in months, did not mention the future at all. The peace Harold had wanted all along had not come from telling more. It had come from deciding what still belonged to him. A year later, during a thunderstorm, he sat alone on the screened porch with rain ticking against the yard and Lillian's old cardigan over the back of his chair. He thought about how many years he had confused openness with surrender. How many times he had offered up raw thoughts before they were ready, only to watch other people build urgency around them. He wished Lillian had seen this version of him, not the harder one, the clearer one, the one who finally understood that love did not require complete access, that family could care deeply and still overreach, that an old man did not become public property just because his hair turned white and his pace slowed down. By the time Mark called that evening, Harold knew exactly what he believed when his son asked, "Everything okay over there, Dad?" Harold looked out at the wet porch rail, the darkening yard, the place where he had spent half a lifetime trying to protect everyone else from discomfort. Then he said, steady as a church bell, "Yes, everything that needs to be shared is okay." And for the first time, that answer was not a wall. It was wisdom. Because the truth Harold Mercer learned at 86 was simple enough to fit in one hand. Peace begins where unnecessary explanation ends.